Hey friend, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm excited to be talking about Half-Life 2 Episode 2, the second episodic continuation of Valve's legendary sci-fi shooter saga. Before we talk about the game, I just wanted to say thank you so much for checking out my channel. If you like the content, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps small creators such as myself just continue to grow and build my content further. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video and also have your support in future videos too, so please consider joining. There's really a lot to discuss before we talk specifically about the game. Let's just go back in time to 2007, which was one of the greatest years in video game history. There were new consoles, there was BioShock, Mass Effect, COD 4, Halo 3, Super Mario Galaxy, Assassin's Creed, Uncharted, Rock Band, Crysis, God of War 2, and yes, 2, even though the PlayStation 3 was already out and they did it totally on the PlayStation 2 only. It's kind of strange, but that happened in 2007 as well. I mean, modern gaming wouldn't probably even exist in the same way if it was not for this year, because some of the most well-known franchises were either born from it or built upon their continued success in it. And yet here I was, about 13 years old, the perfect age for consuming all of this, yet instead, playing Counter-Strike Source 10 hours a day all summer. But when E3 2007 rolled around and the Orange Box had an official lengthy trailer that was shown off by Valve, so much changed. Valve announced that they were putting together the Orange Box as a way to launch 3 major titles that were all wrapping up development right around the same time, and that included Half-Life 2 Episode 2, Portal, and Team Fortress 2. Now, normally when you hear game bundle, the first thing you think of is not like brand new titles coming out. It's more like old games repackaged to squeeze out a few more sales. But Valve really flipped that idea on its head, and they bundled these 3 games that were brand new, high quality titles, highly anticipated games, plus Half-Life 2 and Episode 1 into one box. It was an insane value, and honestly, an action like this has not been replicated in the gaming industry since. One of the funny things that I know is that the name is pretty much accidental. The box was nearly white at first, but the team eventually went with this orange color to kind of match the Half-Life series iconic color palette and identity. So simple, bold, yet instantly recognizable. The legacy of the Orange Box was huge as well. I mean, Portal became a surprise hit and just a total meme machine. And if you were living in that time playing video games, you absolutely knew everything about the cake, whether it was a lie or not. We all know the truth there, right? Team Fortress 2 really redefined multiplayer shooters with its class-based gameplay and stylized art. I think something we've seen heavily inspired the space over the years. And Episode 2 really pushed Half-Life story forward in a really big way. And this bundle helped cement Valve's reputation for innovation and generosity, and it's still remembered today as one of the greatest gaming compilations ever released. Now here in 2025 is where things get a little more bittersweet, I have to say. After the Orange Box, Valve was riding high on critically acclaimed games, a loyal fan base, and a reputation for pushing boundaries. But creatively, that's where things started to stall a little bit. Valve became wildly successful thanks to Steam, which basically became the backbone of PC gaming. But that success really came at a cost, and instead of continuing to build on the momentum with Half-Life 3 or more like story-driven titles, they instead shifted gears kind of hard into the multiplayer space and service-based games. And what we got instead was like Dota 2, Counter-Strike Go, and a whole lot of hats and a whole lot of skins. Great games, sure, but they weren't the kind of narrative experiences that made Valve legendary. And let's not forget the major cliffhanger at the end of Episode 2. Fans such as myself waited for Episode 3 month after month, year after year, especially since the first 2 episodic titles came out pretty much right one after another, and yet it never came, and that silence was one of the biggest heartbreaks, I think, in gaming. And yes, even when Valve did return with Half-Life Alyx in 2020, it ended up being a VR-only title, and as a result, while brilliant from what I've seen, yes, it was locked behind expensive hardware and still not the continuation that people were hoping for. It went back and modified some things about the pre-existing story, but didn't tell us things about what we wanted to know, the things in the future that we're really curious about in terms of what Episode 3 or Half-Life 3 might have explained to us. Instead of new worlds and stories, Valve really leaned into experimental projects like The Lab and Artifact, and yeah, they're cool ideas, but they really lacked the soul and polish of their early work, and it's like they traded the storytelling for tech demos. And lately, that's gotten even messier. Messier in the sense of even recent controversies. Like, let's talk about Counter-Strike 2. Just weeks ago, Valve pushed an update that completely upended the game's skin economy, and they introduced a new trade-up system that allowed players to exchange high-tier items for ultra-rare knives and gloves that carried super expensive pricing because they were in these expensive loot cases with high rarity. And as a result, the entire skin market around Counter-Strike crashed. And we're talking like billions of dollars in real-world value that just got wiped out overnight. Now, I will say that it's insane. When I was younger, skins were just things you went on a mod site and you downloaded and then patched into your game, and then there you go. You have like a flame design on your knife when you're running around in Counter-Strike. So for it to be this out of control is, I just find it personally insane. I don't know who out there is dropping this kind of money on skins, but you know, it shouldn't be that a video game update would basically have its own economic market larger than some country's GDP. But who am I to say? Hey, that's the world we're living in. It's 2025. And you know, players had invested a serious amount of money into those skins and really saw their inventories tank in value. And the community was honestly serious. And it wasn't just like a balance tweak, but it ended up really being a financial disaster. Then it becomes even harder for me to discuss Team Fortress 2, which was a game that when the Orange Box came out and I started playing with my buddies online, I just fell in love with, and I dumped many hours into playing it. And I almost found myself not playing Counter-Strike nearly as much and starting to slowly switch over to Team Fortress 2. But nowadays the game is called Hat Fortress. I mean, that's what I know it as, because the game is all about collecting hats. And the game's been also plagued by bot infestations and lack of updates, and just as a general sense that Valve has like totally abandoned the game, even though I'm sure it was like a good money pit for them, right? That people would just throw their money in and then they would just get it. And despite having a really passionate community still playing the game and creating content themselves, you know, Valve support has been really minimal at best, and it's become a symbol of what happens when a beloved game is left to rot while its company focuses on profitable ventures, which is just totally unfortunate. So yeah, it is true that Valve's been financially unstoppable. It's an incredible company, and as I've grown up over the decades now, just to be a part of that journey and to just see how dominating of a force Steam has become and Valve as a result, it's incredible. But honestly, in the creativity department, it's a really tragic ending for Valve and for Half-Life, kind of where we're at. So we're still waiting for the kind of magic that they used to deliver. And honestly, I hope they find their way back to that someday. And one of the things that's been really exciting about revisiting these games over the past few weeks, Half-Life, Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and Episode 2, is really getting to get back to a baseline of my perspective of Valve and what they were capable of at one point. And you know, I used to be a PC gamer exclusively, and as you can see, over time I've transformed myself into more of a console gamer and collector. But I still wait one day someday for a game to come along that's going to inspire me to sit at my desk, plug away on the keyboard and mouse, and just really vibe and enjoy the experience of playing that title. And I know that Half-Life 3 or Episode 3 would be that game, but unfortunately it's a game that doesn't exist. Sadly, my time has come to an end once again with this series, so I do want to talk next about Valve's biggest tragedy, which is Half-Life 2 Episode 2. And so let's dive a little bit into my thoughts on the game. Starting with the story, Half-Life 2 Episode 2 overall is a more open and varied experience compared to its predecessors, that's for sure. High level, after the destruction of the Citadel, Gordon and Alex must traverse the Outlands and reach a resistance base. And along the way, they encounter new threats, including terrifying hunter enemies and Combine Advisor pods, which are scattered across the region. The first half of this game has you mostly traversing underground mines and antlion layers, while the second is mostly forested and kind of open with its exploration. And I did not find these areas personally to be as engaging to me as the urban landscapes that you will explore in the earlier titles, so it didn't pull me in as much. but where the environments are lesser, it's really made up for a great developing story across the course of this game. One thing I really liked about the title was how the game eased off the heavy-handed scripted sequences that dominated the earlier games, and as soon as the game really starts, you're kind of just right back in the jump seat. There is no long drawn-out narrative of what's going on, or you following an NPC around and watching them kind of act in the world. So the opening feels pretty organic, and it just lets you explore and engage with the world without being constantly yanked into those scenes, which I ended up really liking quite a bit. Another aspect that I really like from the first half of this game is you get to spend a lot of time with the Vortigaunts and exploring antlion pits, which adds kind of a layer of cultural and biological depth to the creatures and the world as it now exists beyond the Combine. And so, crawling through the nests and collecting larval extract is kind of a standout moment for me in a funny way. It really kind of reminded me of the claustrophobic alien vibes from Half-Life 1's Zen sections, in which you do pretty similar things. Thematically, the game continues to explore resistance and sacrifice and the cost of survival in a world dominated by an alien force. And it is a linear experience, that's true, but the pacing and environmental storytelling keep it pretty engaging throughout. And the dialogue is sharp and purposeful. You'll hear a lot from Alex and the Vortigaunts during this title, and they really offer both emotional weight and world-building insight that is really engaging and continues to have me invested as a player as to kind of where we're leading to across the course of the game. So what's genuinely saddest about playing through this is I honestly really enjoyed where the story was going in episode 2. And that makes me wish there was some form of continuation to that story, because there are a ton of loose ends that never really get tied up here. I mean, the first big one is Eli Vance, of course, and the advisors. Who are the advisors? What role do they play in the Combine? What are their origins? How do they communicate? I'm sure these are things Valve would have answered for us if we got a third title. And then there's also the Borealis, and a ship vessel that was owned by Aperture Science, who is a big entity in the Portal games. What was on that ship? What kind of powerful technologies existed that could change the tide of the Resistance War against the Combine? And another big thing, like, who's G-Man? We still don't really know G-Man. We don't know his intentions. We don't know where he's from. Why is he saving Alex via the Vortigaunts? And what is his end game? And what other worldly knowledge could we learn from the Vortigaunts? They played a big role in this title that I would assume we'd get more of going forward. And then on top of that, what is the Super Portal's status? Were they able to close it? What are the Combine planning to send through it? There are just so many things that when this game's credits roll, just totally have me, my mind racing, thinking about what's next, and just excited for what's next. But there is no next. This is it. And that drives me so crazy. Yes, these cliffhangers were absolutely designed to lead into episode 3 or Half-Life 3, but with no continuation in sight, they've really just become legendary loose threads in gaming history, and fans have speculated over time and theorized and even created mods to kind of try to fill the gaps, but the official story itself remains frozen in time. So it's kind of funny to say, it's not just that it ends on a cliffhanger, but it really ends on the ultimate cliffhanger overall. This game could vote. It's 18 years old. Where is the third game? I just find that to be so crazy, and in a moment so raw and so pivotal how it ends, that it just practically begs for resolution, and you can feel the momentum building and the pieces aligning for something massive, whether that's the mystery of the advisors or the looming threat of the Super Portal, the enigma of the Borealis and its ties to Aperture Science and to the Portal games, and of course G-Man's cryptic manipulation of Alex and Gordon. It's all there, just really teed up for a final act that it doesn't seem like we're ever gonna get. Yeah, so instead we're left with silence. No episode 3, no Half-Life 3, just kind of a void where the chapter should have been. And that absence has become part of the game's legacy, an unfinished symphony that echoes through gaming history. It's really a testament to how deeply this world resonated with players that even now, nearly 2 decades later, we're still asking the same questions and still hoping for answers, still waiting for the story to continue. So overall, I really enjoyed the narrative in episode 2. I think what makes it so good, and I would probably revisit this conclusion should a third game ever come out, but that it is the ending, and it ends in such a way that it does, and it's crazy, but yeah, just so many open questions, so many loose threads, the ultimate cliffhanger, It's really brutal. I could rant all day about the story, honestly, so let's just move on and talking a bit about the gameplay experience. At its core, Episodes 2 still sticks to the tried and true Half-Life formula. You have these tight shooting mechanics, these physics-based puzzles, these scripted set pieces, and you'll fight through combined soldiers, zombies, and new enemies, the Hunters, which are sleek and fast, and these aggressive creatures that stalk you with surprising intelligence. And I really liked fighting them, I gotta be honest, though. Once you kind of get a feel for them, there are a lot of hunters in the game, and they do become a one-trick pony, because what I started to do is realize that a few well-placed shotgun blasts alone could drop them, and so the tactical challenge did fade itself. But still, I thought their AI was really impressive. Both the animations and the environmental awareness that these enemies employ is just very, very top tier, and I don't think it's often seen in games, so it's a really good reminder of how far AI has come, or how far it's fallen in some modern games, to be honest. One thing I observed that didn't really stand out to me when I was younger, but now replaying these games does, is that there's a number of gameplay sections in this game that are very wave-based in their set pieces. Something that I didn't see so much in Episode 1 or Half-Life 2. And they have some pretty solid setups, to be honest. So they did require a bit of thinking or endurance to push through, and I found the environments allowed for creative thinking on the fly and made it really fun. So for a great example, the one in the underground with the antlions and the turrets that you set up and have to move around is fantastic fun, even if maybe it did go on like one wave too long. And now that I think about it, similarly, you know, the Strider ending, or when you're getting the muscle car, you gotta fight through zombie waves, or you get put in a pit and then they come out from all different angles. And this game has a lot of those now that I think about it. Some tower defense-esque moments that I don't quite remember being in those other titles, but was an interesting evolution. And I really do like tower defense games, so not one that I would complain about personally, but something that really stood out to me in kind of the gameplay department that they changed up. But one de-evolution that I did want to call out that did stand out to me in Episode 2 was that the game had noticeably fewer physics puzzles compared to its predecessors. So Valve here appears to have leaned more into like environmental traversal and combat set pieces, and more of the puzzles become like a find an object and put it where it needs to go. You know, a generator battery or plug in a thing. And one I thought was pretty cool here was the bridge road seesaw. So you have to push cars to one side of this bridge that's kind of seesawing and make the road flip so you can drive your vehicle forward. I thought that was pretty cool. But aside from these little changes to the gameplay style, I think mechanically overall the game plays like its predecessors, of course, with only a few subtle changes. One thing that I noticed right away was that the suit's auxiliary power, which is used for sprinting and flashlight and oxygen, does feel increasingly irrelevant in Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Sprint and flashlight powers are now separate systems, which makes the auxiliary meter kind of feel a little more unnecessary and maybe bogging up space on the UI. However, I think if Valve went this direction, what they should have done is just left sprint and flashlight be permanently enabled or disabled at the player's whim, because as it stands, as they break these systems out, it just leads to a point where the meters themselves and the fact that they run out and you have to stop, just it's not going to happen as often and not going to feel as important when it does. Like in Episode 1, when you have the flashlight, if you're sprinting around and you're in a pitch black environment, that's really going to cost you something strategically. So you kind of lose that strategy in the combat here because they're breaking out these systems. Even if it's like a little minor thing, it still does change the flow of gameplay overall. Navigation here too as well is mostly linear, but the environments are more open than in Episode 1, that's for sure, and open more than in Half-Life 2 as well. So you're going to spend a lot of time driving this muscle car through forested terrains, which is fun in concept, but technically it's a little rough on the consoles. When you're using an analog stick to control the acceleration based on the angles and such, this begins to introduce like sound glitches into the engine noises, and they start to cut in and out, and also impacts sound consistency overall, and that becomes a little immersion breaking. So it's kind of a reminder that Source wasn't necessarily built for nuanced vehicle physics, especially with the controller in mind. And so with this as a big highlight of the gameplay in Half-Life 2 Episode 2, I do feel like there could have been some improvements between Half-Life 2 and this title, in the sense of Valve kind of beefing up and working these mechanics a little better. The muscle car is awesome. It's the coolest of the three vehicles you're going to drive across the games, in my opinion. but it would have been nice to see more of the sound consistencies addressed, and also just see the fluidity of controlling the vehicle improved as well, as it really just kind of handles and feels like you're still playing Half-Life 2 itself. One thing I always like to look at is the HUD in a game, and here it's clean and familiar. It has minimal distractions. It's just as it has been in Episode 1 and Half-Life 2, so pretty functional, though not particularly stylish. It's what we've come to expect out of Half-Life 2 Episode 2, and don't really have many improvements overall to the system. I thought it worked pretty well on the console. One thing I thought was funny, and I address in the Episode 1 review that I did last week on the channel, is length of the game. So I played Episode 1, it took me a few hours to beat, and one of the critical opinions that I've seen about the game is it's just way too short to be a gem compared to Half-Life 2 and Episode 2. But when I went back and I looked at all of my recorded footage, which I picked up from the moment I started playing the game to finishing the game, I beat the game in about 5 to 5.5 hours. And maybe part of that is being quite familiar with the game itself. But that incremental, it's really not that big of a difference from Episode 1. And comparatively, if you think about all three titles together as one game, which is how we would probably, most people would view it nowadays, since you can just pick up the orange box or whatever and play them all back to back. You know, it's like a good 30-hour experience, right? But this was a critical opinion seen in Episode 1, and I haven't seen so many folks talk about it for Episode 2. I just wanted to call out that my experience was that these games are pretty similar in length, and so that, for me, emboldens my belief that Episode 1 is the best title in the Half-Life series. And I'm just playing with you guys. They're both fantastic games, but just something I wanted to call out as well from the gameplay department, that they could have gone a little more overall for this title, also for Episode 1, to be honest. They both could have been a little lengthier. Looking back, the best I could say is that Episode 2 really feels like a game caught between evolution and restraint, in the sense of this was the future vision for what Valve wanted to do with the series, and it was going to be that bridging transition, not only narratively in terms of building and developing the story, but also evolving the gameplay and the gameplay styles. But it's kind of that caught in between, and of course we never got the third entry, so we don't know what that would have looked like exactly. You know, on one hand, it introduces new enemy types like the Hunters, it adds this wave-based combat sequences, and it kind of flirts with these tower defense mechanics in some ways, and opens up the world just enough to let you breathe between fights. But on the other hand, it quietly steps away from some of the series' most iconic gameplay elements, like its physics puzzles that once defined Half-Life's ingenuity, and I ended up enjoying a lot when I played through Half-Life 2 earlier this month. And so, what we get instead are these simpler, defined kind of object placement tasks and traversal setups that, while functional, do kind of lack the cleverness and surprise of the earlier games. Mechanically, it's a solid title. That's the best I can say. The shooting is tight, the pacing is sharp, and the set pieces are memorable. So there are some signs of wear, like the increasingly irrelevant suit power system or the janky vehicle physics that remind you Source wasn't really built for analog stick nuances. HUD and menu systems just really feel by this time like they're reaching a point of kind of coasting on familiarity in its design rather than pushing forward, and maybe that's the most telling part. Episode 2 is a game that hints at new directions in a lot of ways. It teases deeper systems, and then just as it starts to stretch its wings, really, that's slightly longer than Episode 1, yes, still feeling like a middle chapter, waiting for its final act, and with no Episode 3 in sight, the sense of an unfinished evolution does really kind of linger in this title, making the gameplay feel like a bridge to nowhere, as opposed to a bridge between two titles. As I'd mentioned, Episode 1 was the best Half-Life game ever. So yeah, overall, just a fantastic gameplay experience. I was really intrigued by the things Valve was doing differently and trying differently in this title. And I do love that every single one of the Half-Life games really has its own identity in how you play it and what it is, even though it's one consistently visually aesthetic experience that you're going to get. I continue to be impressed in Episode 2 with Valve's sound design overall, and the approach to it, and just how great it is. I really gotta say, the voice acting here is solid across the board, again with Alex Vance continuing to be a standout person. But I did also want to call out that the Vortigaunts get a lot of screen time and a lot of writing and delivery of that dialogue, and the cryptic, kind of poetic speech that they often get adds a lot of flavor to the lore in the Half-Life series. Surprisingly to me, Tony Todd, who acted in the movie Candyman and final destination. He came and played the Vortigaunts in episode 2, and he brought a really deep and resonant kind of gravitas to the Vortigaunts. So Louis Gossett Jr., a lot of people are familiar with. He played the voices in the first 2 titles, and he was replaced by Tony due to some casting change by Valve. And I don't know if that's ever really been investigated. There's no real official reason necessarily given publicly. But I feel like Todd's portrayal overall here adds a really nice element of quality to the style, and it shines since you spend so much time with them, that is the Vortigaunts, early in this title. Sound effects continue to be quite consistent in both their delivery and their style here in episode 2. I do have to say there are areas where it can get messy, and we discussed them a little bit. I think the Source Engine has never really been known for its audio fidelity. I think the physics-based objects can often introduce like a little bit of improv to what you're hearing. And that's really beginning to show in the seams, especially when driving that muscle car, which I mentioned. It's kind of a sonic mess. The engine sounds are glitchy, the collision noises are pretty inconsistent, and it just feels kind of gamey overall in the way in which it's gonna break the immersion for the gamer as they're kind of listening to this going on. So yeah, I do think that that's somewhere that Valve could have spent a little bit of extra energy on improving a bit in this title. But the other sound effects, again, overall are in part on what you would expect. But you will spend a lot of time in these driving sections, so that's gonna stand out to you across this title for sure. And Kelly Bailey returns. He did the soundtrack for the other Half-Life games, and he came back for the soundtrack too. It's sparse, but very effective. It kicks in at key moments as needed to heighten tension or underscore emotional beats. And I can't, however, I would say pick out specific tunes that really stood out to me. The sounds are moody, the tension is building across the tracks, which I really liked. And now there's a little more hard rock to match the game's shifting tones. And I did like that, but I really was waiting for that iconic song to come in where I know for sure, like when I hear that, oh, that's Half-Life 2 Episode 2, and it didn't really do that for me necessarily. Audio-wise then, it's really kind of a mixed bag. We have fantastic voice acting with Tony Todd stepping in as the Vortigaunts and giving them a deeper, more ancient resonance that fits their expanded role. But the Source Engine's audio quirks are hard to ignore in this title, especially when you're behind the wheel of the muscle car and the soundscapes really start to unravel in your ears. I really did like Kelly Bailey's soundtrack. It's moody and effective, but more atmospheric than it is memorable for the most part. It works, right? But it doesn't linger in the way that some of the other games' songs and titles have. So all in all, the presentation holds up, but you really start to feel the edges fraying a bit, in my opinion. It's a game that is really pushing against the limits of the engine. And while it doesn't break, it definitely creaks a bit, we could say. And then finally, want to give a little bit of time to the game's visual identity. So by 2007 standards, Episode 2 did look really great. The Source Engine delivered crisp textures, expressive character models, and dynamic lighting. However, the environment for me in the style department didn't quite hit the same highs as the urban charm of City 17. So the forested areas here feel a little more generic, right? It's kind of hard to give a unique identity to areas within a forest, and you're gonna spend a lot of times there. And so they don't really carry that same personality or world building weight that I felt City 17 did. Visually, Episode 2 doesn't necessarily reinvent the wheel, but it does stretch the Source Engine a bit further than Episode 1 did. So you get a little more dynamic lighting, better particle effects, larger outdoor environments that give the game kind of a sense of scale that was missing in the earlier episodes, especially Episode 1 where you spend a lot of time underground and in tunnels and such. So I did really like that. A lot of these changes are subtle, but they're going to be noticeable, especially in the forested areas and the antlion nest sequences when the lighting is hitting just right. Yes, so visually overall, again, just a great experience. I really like the look of the game, and I enjoyed some of the technology enhancements that they were making. And again, I just wanted to see what this game would look like in a third entry, and maybe 20 years later we'll get one that matches 20 years of technology development over time, and we'll be blown away by what Half-Life 3, or Episode 3, could look like ultimately. But that right there is most of what I wanted to share about Episode 2. I think it's just overall a strong continuation of the Half-Life saga with standout moments like the zombie-infested sniper sequence with Alex, or deeper lore around the Vortigaunts and antlions, and new enemy types like the Hunters. But it's not without flaws. There's some gameplay systems that have changed. The power suit's a good example where immediately it just stood out to me that like, oh, well, this is kind of pointless now. The sound design's a little glitchy. The forest environments, I think, lacked a little character of the earlier urban settings, in my opinion. But still, the world building, the gameplay variety, the emotional beats make it truly a must-play for fans of the series. And all that said, it's really sad to see such a fun and good series of games come to an end, and a shocking end, one that I wish we could get more of, and truly we deserve more of, but it doesn't look like we're going to get that necessarily. Valve works in a really decentralized style of management as a company, and so as a result, projects can get picked up, people can change their minds and go work on other things, and it's really hard to, I'm sure, pull the pieces together to get folks behind developing what would have to be a monumental title at this point. I mean, could you imagine if the game came out and it was a disaster? Could it ever live up to expectations? I don't even know, and that's probably where Gabe Newell and all of Valve kind of find themselves when thinking about what Half-Life 3 might look like. But even then, I would be excited to play that game. It would maybe bring me back to PC gaming for a while. I have a couple questions for you. What did you think of Half-Life 2 Episode 2? Did you like it? Did you have different opinions than I? And I'd love to hear you share your thoughts with me about them. But also, where do you stand on Half-Life 3? Are we ever going to get Half-Life 3? Are we ever going to get Episode 3 and see a continuation of these games? It's been 20 years. That's just insane to me. So anyways, I'm looking forward to that. Please, if you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing again. And otherwise, just stay well, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. All right, peace.